Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I'm going to be giving you a full rundown of the upcoming Japanese tank destroyer tech tree, which will be arriving in the 1.20.1 update. And with this video being released on Friday, it's probably going to be about 3 to 4 weeks until you can get your hands on these tanks. And so in today's video, I'm also going to let you know how you can get prepared as best as possible for the arrival of these hard-hitting vehicles. So all of these tanks are very similar to the German heavily armored vehicles, like a Jagdpanzer 100. That is what the new Japanese line is all about. But in today's video, I'm going to break down every single one of the vehicles, starting at tier 5 and going up to tier 10, to let you know maybe which ones are worth playing and which ones are worth skipping out. So, firstly, I hope all of you have been active on the channel and unchecked accelerated crew training on your Chi-He, the tier 4 Japanese medium tank. You are going to need 13,550 experience on the Chi-He if you want to get the Ho-Ni 3 on the first day. So the Ho-Ni 3, how good does this look as a tier 5 stock tank? Well, this gun looks positively workable stock. It's a 75mm with a decent amount of penetration, okay accuracy, okay damage per minute. Doesn't look half bad. Also, this vehicle shares a radio with other Japanese tanks, the heavies or the mediums, so you're most likely going to have it already. Armor-wise, however, this thing is not heavily armored. It's a glass cannon. It's got 25mm of all-round protection, and so if you see these things, fire high explosive rounds at them and you're going to make fun of them on release day. Mobility wise, however, this vehicle is not slow by any means. Stock, it's got a 13.5 power to weight ratio, 40 kilometers an hour top speed limit. But one thing that does suck is its view range, 310 meters base. Even with binoculars, it's not even going to get that good. So let's take a look to see how this vehicle gets when we fully upgrade it. And my recommended upgrade path on this tank will be to take the gun first, as everything is better about the gun. Then I'd recommend taking the engine and then focus on taking the tracks. When you've got this thing fully upgraded, it looks like a half decent tank. Nice damage per minute, good penetration, okay alpha damage, great aim time, accuracy. However, the 5 degrees of gun depression does look a little bit painful. The speed is pretty okay. I guess it's just the fact that it doesn't have the view range that you want to spot for yourself at decent distances and doesn't have the armor to be able to do anything. So this feels like it's more of a support tank destroyer in all honesty. Doesn't look like the best thing at tier 5, isn't going to be revolutionary. And my tip for you is, if you play this thing on day 1, there's going to be a lot of Ho-Ni 3s around, fire high explosive rounds at them, and you should easily be able to penetrate the enemy tanks. And you'll do just extra damage, especially towards its gun shield. Visual impressions of this vehicle is that it frankly could have a fully traversable turret, which however definitely isn't the case on a tank like this, as it has only a 10 degrees to the left and 10 degrees to the right gun arc. So all in all, fairly uninspiring stuff so far. Hopefully it's going to get more exciting when we reach tier 6 and we're playing in the G-Row. So first impressions of the G-Row, wow, this thing looks like an absolute freak. Look at the way that the tracks are kind of indented over the hull, and this kind of, it looks like a greenhouse kind of effect with this kind of rounded hull. What an absolute bizarre looking tank. So how bad is this thing stock? It's definitely not the best gun you're ever going to use on a tier 6 tank destroyer, but it does look like it will be reasonably playable. But 150 alpha damage, that doesn't look fun. However, thankfully, this has a 40-meter increase in view range compared to its predecessor, so you're actually going to be able to spot and snipe for yourself. Accordingly, I'm probably going to end up taking a gun ram events and a durability device on this vehicle. And when it's stock, one thing that does look abysmal is that power to weight ratio, 8.69 on this stock engine. How much of an upgrade is the upgraded engine? Oh my lord, it's only 20 horsepower? What is this thing? Alright, so while the stock gun looks usable, yeah, its mobility definitely doesn't. Let's take a look to see how good this upgraded gun is. So its alpha damage is going to over double, its penetration is going to go up by 25mm, its DPM is good, its accuracy is still good, and its aim time is good. That looks like a very decent gun to take, and you can equip it without getting the tracks. Accordingly, my recommendation on this vehicle would be to go for the gun, then I'd recommend going for the engine, then I'd recommend going for the tracks, and then grinding towards your tier 7 Japanese tank destroyer dream. Compared to its predecessor, we see that the G-Row has a little bit of a DPM upgrade, a little bit of a pen upgrade. The alpha damage is lovely though. Its gun handling is okay for a tank that hits for 300 at tier 6. However, the amazingly alarming thing about this vehicle is the mobility. It has a horrible engine, and so it's never going to reach its 40 kilometers an hour top speed limit. Accordingly, some of you might even want to use grousers on this tank to help, because that will be more impactful than a turbo on this tank, and I'm definitely going to be very annoyed about these poor ground resistances and this limited top speed. Armor-wise, 50 millimeters of armor. Yeah, these Japanese tanks are not looking like they've got very much to mention here. However, this one, at least it's going to defend itself from high explosive rounds that are fired at it at tier 6. All in all, really disappointing so far. This vehicle has the view range and the gun to be quite vicious, but it doesn't have the armor or the mobility, whereas the previous tank had the mobility, but it didn't have the view range to spot for itself. So all in all, yeah, pretty ugly stuff for the Japanese tank destroyers. Maybe it's going to get better at tier 7 as you play the Cheeto SP. Alright, let's do a first impression of the Cheeto SP. What does it look like inside the garage? Alright, well, yeah, it kind of looks just like a medium tank destroyer hybrid. Really a medium tank with just a superstructure on it and no turret. So how bad is this thing going to be stock? Well, interestingly enough, you don't even get to use the gun that you had from the previous tank on this next vehicle. So stock, your alpha damage is going to go back down to 140 at tier 7. That sounds absolutely horrific, and I would thoroughly recommend to invest the 21,000 experience in getting that upgraded gun as quickly as you can, because that upgraded gun is going to increase the alpha damage to 320, it'll increase the penetration massively, the damage per minute, and all you'll have to do is sacrifice a little bit of accuracy and aim time. You are going to want to do everything that you can to be able to get that gun on this tank as quickly as possible. What about the mobility of this vehicle? Well, it's definitely not great news. 40 forwards and 15 backwards like all of the Japanese tank destroyers so far, and while the power to weight ratio is better than its predecessor, it's still not very good when stock. Hopefully the upgraded engine is going to provide a big old horsepower boost, and oh my word, it does. Not only does the engine halve itself in weight, which will help the power to weight ratio, it gains an extra 150 horsepower, meaning that your power to weight ratio on this tank is going to go from just over 10 to now being just under 15. Huge upgrade. This tank, I would thoroughly recommend burning the free experience on the gun and the engine. Otherwise, it's going to be practically unplayable for you. Or maybe just go for blueprints and go for the next tank. Alright, so when this thing is fully upgraded, is it going to be a good tank? Is it finally going to be one that I can recommend? Well, the DPM, that's not bad for tier 7. Pen isn't bad. This reminds me a lot of a Jagdpanther. The gun handling looks pretty darn good, and it's got 7 degrees of gun depression now, which will actually allow you to work a ridge line, and the power to weight ratio is not abysmal like the G-Row. It's got enough hit points at tier 7 and enough view range to mean that you could probably end up using coated optics rather than binoculars on this tank if you have a really good crew and you get all of the field mods. And so I actually think that this is where I would recommend starting the Japanese tank destroyers. The tier 5 and the tier 6 look like they've got too many bad things about them, and the Cheeto SP looks like it's the first one that maybe might be worth recommending. How about the armor? Wow, what a difference. Now you can actually bounce things. You've got 240 millimeters of armor. You have got a weak point on top, but maybe just try and keep moving and try and avoid that. And if you use your 7 degrees of gun depression, yeah, your upper hull is half decent as well. This looks like a great tank. Even against gold rounds, it's got some protection. And that will be kind of like your standard pen on tier 8 and tier 9 tanks. Wow, the Cheeto SP looks like it could actually be a really good tier 7 tank destroyer, and the first one along the line that would get my recommendation for actually playing. Alright, so now it's getting serious. We're going to be jumping up to tier 8 in the Ho-Ri 2. So the Ho-Ri 2. Let's look at it and give it my first impressions visually about whether this looks like a cool tier 8 TD. Because once you get to tier 8, you know it's serious, right? Okay, so yeah, it looks like a Chi-Ri. It looks just like a Chi-Ri, but with a welded turret. Oh my goodness gracious. That is not a good thing. Everybody knows the Chi-Ri as a tier 7 medium is not fabulous, and after the tier 7 TD was so good, I'm kind of worried about what this tier 8 is going to be like. Okay, so at least this time, Wargaming aren't shafting you with the gun. They're kind of allowing you to use a gun from stock that is just as good, if not better, than the previous tank. So that's good news. But what happens if you upgrade this gun? Because this doesn't look great for tier 8, I'm not going to lie. It looks like it could work, but it's not great. Okay, so if you go up to the 120mm, your alpha damage will go up to 400, nice for tier 8, 250 pen, nice for tier 8, DPM's okay, accuracy's okay, aim time's okay, looks okay, but this tank is going to need statistics in other areas to make up for it because that doesn't look like a very good gun for tier 8. So big jump up in the survivability, mobility is fine, even with the stock engine, view range is fine, and the armor on the vehicle looks as if it's not going to be too bad with 220. Okay, let's take a look to see how the vehicle will perform when it is fully upgraded compared to its predecessor. Okay, so big DPM drop, but a huge pen and alpha damage upgrade. The gun handling, a little bit worse than the previous tank, but it looks okay. I like 8 degrees of gun depression. That makes me very excited. But one thing that does suck is 30 kilometers an hour forwards. This is so much slower than the previous tank. Well, hopefully the armor is going to be much better than on the tier 7. And, oh, it doesn't really look like the armor is that much better. I mean, it's better, but it's not kind of better tier for tier. This is what 205mm of pen looks like, and this is what 250mm of pen looks like. Weak point wise, this vehicle has one. It's also got an overmatchable plate on top by all 106mm caliber guns. That armor, it's not going to do badly in a good matchup, but it's not going to do well inside a bad one. Yeah, this is going to have troubles, boys and girls. I think it'll be quite nice against tier 6s and tier 7s and some tier 8s, a bit like the Car-Re, but all in all, it doesn't look impressive. I tell you what, one thing that could be quite funny is why don't we add the Car-Re in and see how it compares to the tier 8 tech tree. Okay, so the Car-Re has the DPM, it has the pen, it has the alpha damage, it has the aim time, it has the accuracy, it has the gun handling, it has one less degree of gun depression. It is significantly faster forwards, and it's significantly faster backwards. It has less hit points, but I'd say it has better armor protection. Yeah, if you were hoping that the Ho-Re 2 was going to be much better than the Tier 8 Premium, you're going to be very disappointed. All in all, this vehicle looks yeah, just a little bit disappointing for me at Tier 8, not nearly as good as the Cheeto SP was at Tier 7. Alright, so now let's jump up to Tier 9, and we're going to have a look at the Ho-Re 1, which hopefully is going to be better than the Ho-Re 2. Okay, so the Ho-Re 1, wow, it kind of looks a bit like a Ferdinand meets a Stura Emil. What a weird tank at Tier 9. So statistically, how does this thing look stock? Alright, that doesn't look like a bad gun to have on a Tier 9 tank destroyer. Great pen, good alpha. Well, yeah, 500 alpha is very nice. Good HE rounds as well at 600. Okay damage per minute and okay accuracy. This looks like a perfectly playable tank. Doesn't look like it's going to win any awards being stock. Alright, I'm interested about the mobility in the armor. So the mobility of this thing is 32 forwards and 16 backwards. That's quite slow. Hopefully it's got some good view range. It doesn't really have good view range, which means that you're not going to be able to slap a turbo on this thing if you want to be able to spot for yourself. But the armor of 245mm does look fairly interesting. So let's add a fully upgraded Tier 9 in. And again, my recommended upgrade path will be to get the gun first, because this gun looks like it's a big old upgrade. 290 pen, 650 alpha, huge damage per minute upgrade. Race to get that gun as quickly as you can. Then get yourself an engine which isn't even really that much of an upgrade. You know what, on this tank, I might even recommend skipping the engine if you don't like it and go straight for the Ho-Re 3. So the Ho-Re 1 has a big old damage per minute upgrade, a big pen upgrade, a big alpha damage upgrade, and it's got very nice accuracy for such a large caliber gun. It loses that 8 degrees of gun depression, goes back down to 7, and it has the same kind of mobility as the Ho-Re 2, which is definitely not impressive. The hit points are up, the view range is up to 390, so when you get all the field mods, you won't actually need coated optics on this tank with a good crew and with a premium consumable. And I'm excited to see what the Ho-Re 1's armor is going to be like. Okay, that's interesting. 300mm on this kind of like superstructure of the tank with 240 on the mid plate, but an overmatchable plate here for 150mm caliber guns or high explosive anti-tank rounds. Very interesting. It can kind of side scrape, but the sides become a bit of a weak point like on the Ferdinand. Wow, when it's using its gun depression, that armor is very impressive indeed. I think this thing could be a fairly interesting tank, and it's going to be a bit like the Car-Re, where you have to try and find positions to make that 7 degrees work. That mid plate is going to be very nice against tier 7s and tier 8s, not so nearly nice against equal tanks, and it has a horrible lower plate. So you're definitely going to want to do everything that you can to expose, not expose this. All right, so all in all, so far, I feel like The tier 5 and 6 were a skip. The tier 7 looks perfectly playable. The 8 looks like a skip for me, but the 9 actually looks like it's going to be quite an interesting tank. I don't think it's going to do anything revolutionary, but I think it'll be a perfectly playable tank destroyer that will reward a player with good map knowledge. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's going to get exciting now as we're taking a look at the tier 10 Ho-Ri 3 for the very first time. These are going to be my initial impressions on the latest tier 10 tank destroyer in the game. And once again, it does kind of look like a Sturm Mill. It almost looks a bit like an Object 261 as well, with regards to being a self-propelled gun in that regard. I like the slanty slope. I wonder if that's going to work well against heat as well as AP. I like the angled side for keeping your front on. These are very interesting, kind of like engines on the top of the tank here, or are they fancy exhausts? Not quite sure about that. And it'll be very interesting to see how good the superstructure is. So this tank comes with only one gun. It's got 700 alpha damage, but it's got nice high explosive rounds, 900 alpha damage with 90 millimeters of pen. All in all, this looks like a fairly impressive vehicle, but let's take a look to see how statistically it has got better compared to the previous tank. All right, so nice damage per minute upgrade, better than the Gorilla. Great pen, 305 on its standard, and it gets armor piercing with 360 millimeters of pen. That's very impressive as well. It's not going to be like a Gorilla that only gets like 330 millimeters, albeit of heat pen there. 700 alpha damage is nice, little upgrade. The aim time of 2.5 seconds, decent. Gun handling, very decent. Won't need to improve that with a rotation mechanism. 7 degrees of gun depression, not bad. Bit disappointed with the top speed of 35 kilometers an hour. This is going to be a very slow tank destroyer, but 18 backwards means you're going to be able to quickly pull back over ridge lines indeed. 300 millimeters of armor, boys and girls, but how much is it actually 300? Yeah, it is. It is 300, but you know what? The Ho-Ri had 300 millimeters of armor as well, so this isn't going to be nearly as good against premium rounds at tier 10. Not bad, but I think what's exciting about this tank is that sloped armor. Look at that. If you keep your gun just pointing directly at your opponents and you use your gun depression, you've got 302 millimeters of upper protection, which means that your opponents are going to need premium rounds to go through you. And your whole upper hull becomes a ricochet against everything apart from high explosive anti-tank rounds. But a horrible lower plate on this tank. Again, this vehicle looks like, to me, it's going to be a specialist that wants to try and find hold down positions with 7 degrees of gun depression. It's going to play a lot like a Jagdpanther 2 at tier 10. But that is an exciting gun to have on a Jagdpanther 2. Field mods wise, I wonder what kind of field mods this vehicle is going to get. So it actually gets the concealment because it is a versatile tank destroyer. So you will actually end up with having very impressive camo rating on this vehicle for it being a heavily armored TD. And it's also going to get a tricky decision to make with the final field mod. Do you want to go 4 kilometers an hour faster forwards but lose a bit of damage per minute? Or do you want to increase the damage per minute and go much slower? Personally for me, I think I'll reduce the damage per minute on this tank and I'll increase that forward speed. Otherwise, I'm just going to end up being too slow. And you know what? With the overhead camshaft engine and also using that with a turbo, that's going to allow this thing to go at 43 or 45 kilometers an hour, depending on what kind of a turbo you use on your tank. And that will actually make this quite fast for getting around. Sure, it's not going to be a super fast TD, but it will not be slow by any means. And I think most people will want to try and improve the top speed on this tank, unless you feel like you're on a city map. But unfortunately, you can't really change the field mods depending on the map that you get. But increasing your top speed, then you could drop the turbo and maybe use a durability device on this vehicle and kind of turn into a bit more of a super heavy tank destroyer. All in all, this one looks good. I don't think it's going to be the new best tier 10 tank destroyer in the game, but I think it will have its niche on the battlefield. And I think if there's one thing that this tank will do, is it will force its opponents to fire a lot of gold rounds. Because as soon as they load gold, this thing's going to be a nice, easy meat for them to be able to deal with. But if they're not firing gold, yeah, this thing is going to be a predator against tier 8 and tier 9 tanks. So all in all, the Japanese tank destroyer tech tree, what are they? Well, they start off as being these glass cannon vehicles that are very forgettable, and then they transition into these heavily armored vehicles that kind of slowly get slower, but then kind of speed up a little bit at the end because of the field mod. I think that the heavily armored Japanese TDs starting from tier 7 upwards are going to be good. I think the tier 8 will be a little bit painful, but I think that the 7, 9 and the 10 will be perfectly playable TDs. They don't look outrageously overpowered, but remember, this is early days on the test server, and so everything is subject to change, and so stay tuned for any kind of updates I will provide on the channel. I don't think these tank destroyers are going to be revolutionary. They're not going to come in and destroy the game like the Italian TDs did, but they're still not going to be as irrelevant as, for example, the Chinese tank destroyers. I don't think these tank destroyers will end up being very popular because they don't provide any novel gameplay. You know, they're not the hardest hitting, they're not the best armored, they're not the most mobile, they're not the most sneaky. But what they do is a lot of things pretty well. They're not super slow, they have a good amount of armor to go with them, and they hit hard, and they hit often with good damage per minute. I think they'll be all-purpose, exciting tank, well, maybe not exciting. They'll be all-purpose tank destroyers, but they're not going to be that exciting. But considering how much content there is going into the patch, it's amazing that we have this whole new branch of tank destroyers the Wargaming aren't really selling as a highlight to update 1.20.1. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was my preview of the Japanese tank destroyers. I hope you enjoyed it, or maybe you just thought it was useful, my recommendations about where to save your free experience and where to possibly start. If it was and you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments what you think about all of the Japanese tank destroyers. Do you think they look amazing? Do you think they look awful? Are you going to skip this tech tree? Are you going to race towards this tech tree? Let me know what you all think in the comments down below. And if you're watching this video as it's released on Friday, I'm going to be streaming all day. I'm going to try and get on the test server, going to test out all the new features, and there are also going to be brand new drops available, token drops on the channel, so you can come and get yourself some goodies as well. So why not swing by and see all of the 1.20.1 drama unfold live on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.